Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start today's video with the tale of neighborly revenge. Back in the 1970s, ROP was the perfect tenant, helpful, polite, and trying to keep the peace. But when the guy next door started pulling a double standard about noise, things took a loud turn. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Mower Wars. How my neighbor's hypocrisy drove him out. When my wife and I first got married, we rented a small house in an older part of town. Our landlady, a nice older widow, lived next door. I'm the type of person who likes to take care of things, so I offered to mow both our lawns every week. In exchange for the favor, I made a deal with her where she knocked $10 off our rent every month, which was a pretty decent deal back in the 1970s. On the other side of our house lived another renter, a guy who worked third shift. He'd sleep during the day, so I always tried to be considerate and mowed only on Friday or Saturday evenings, thinking that would allow him to sleep undisturbed after his overnight shift. I figured 4 or 5 p.m. wouldn't be too bad since it was still early in the evening and I didn't want to wake him up. Turns out I wasn't as considerate as I thought. The guy started complaining to the landlady about the noise from the lawnmower. He claimed it kept him awake, even though I didn't start mowing until mid-afternoon. I was a bit confused, but I figured he must have been really sensitive to the noise. Meanwhile, my wife, who was a nurse, worked crazy hours, 12-hour shifts, alternating days and nights every 6 weeks. It wasn't unusual for me to be up early or late, depending on when she worked. One Saturday morning, after taking my wife to work at 6 a.m., I was up early, around 7:30 a.m. The guy next door came home from his overnight shift. Instead of resting, he decided to work on his hot rod Chevy. He parked the car right under my bedroom window and started grinding away on it. Then he began hammering, making a racket that went on for a good half hour or so. By this time, I had already been awake for almost 2 hours, and I was getting more than a little frustrated with the noise. I'd been polite enough, trying not to disturb him, but now he was keeping me awake with his loud car repairs right next to my house. It felt a little hypocritical, to be honest. So I decided to wait until 10:30 a.m. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my lawnmower, removed the muffler entirely to make it extra loud, and began mowing the side of the house next to his. He was still out there working on his car, and I knew he could hear every bit of it. 2 weeks later, the guy and his family moved out. I didn't know for sure if my little act of revenge had anything to do with it, but I sure enjoyed the feeling of getting back at him. It wasn't just the noise, it was the principle of it. He'd made my life harder with his inconsiderate behavior, so I figured I could return the favor. Edit. I should mention that I didn't actually know he had a problem with my mowing until my landlady told me about it. He never came directly to me with his complaints. He always went to her instead. I never mowed more than once a week, so I didn't think I was bothering him too much. His wife worked during the day and their kids were in daycare, so they weren't home until around 5 p.m. I often saw him in the yard after that, spending time with his kids, so it didn't seem like he was really sleeping as much as he made out. Still, I never expected him to make such a big deal about it. But in the end, it didn't matter much. He moved out, and I got a small sense of satisfaction. This story is pure old-school neighborly warfare. It's a tricky balance between being considerate and saying no when someone becomes the block's main character. You attempted to be respectful by mowing at acceptable hours, but this guy, who plainly had no problem turning on his grinder at 7:30 a.m., expected complete silence. It's not surprising they moved out shortly after. Living next to someone who refuses to compromise on the simplest of neighborly courtesies is draining. You didn't just win the battle, you cleared the field. Bravo. And our second story. Mark's first delivery, when liquor met ladies' night. The occurrence of this event took place at the beginning of the century, specifically in either 2003 or 2004. I was a student at the university and I was looking for a job. I was appointed to work as a delivery driver for a liquor store in the afternoon in addition to delivering chips and nuts. We worked from 1700 to 2200 with the exception of Friday and Saturday when we stayed open until 1 o'clock, paid overtime. It was a simple gig at that point. One of the bars or clubs might require additional alcohol during the night, thus those 2 days were set aside for that purpose. It was Friday night and we got a call for more alcohol from a local strip club. That night it was me and my trainee doing the deliveries. He was the 18-year-old nephew of the owner that was training to take the place of the other driver. He was moving away. Let's call my trainee Mark. Mark was a water polo player, rather good-looking but very shy, all important for later. We arrive at the strip club and, unfortunately, we have to use the main entrance. We march at the bar, deliver the cases, and make a beeline to the manager's office to take care of payment and paperwork. As we step out of the office, I realize we had made a major tactical blunder. Not quite a cluster F, but close. You see, that particular Friday was International Women's Day, and it was a long tradition in my country that for this day, the strip clubs will have male performers. During our entry, we didn't notice the troupe dancing on stage, but we left the office just as the show on stage had come to an end, followed by a small break, and suddenly found ourselves surrounded by women in various stages of drunkenness. They were approaching the bar for refills. "Where were they hiding you?" a woman said to Mark. "Yes, you. You should have come out earlier," another said, caressing his bicep. Mark had got a few whistles and was surrounded by 3 women. "I would take this one for a private dance," I heard the woman's voice behind me and felt a hand moving on my thigh from behind. While I could play along all night, Mark had turned beet red and staring at the ground, which somehow made him an irresistible beacon for the women in the club. I untangled myself from the lady behind me and grabbed Mark's arm and pulled him towards me. "Ladies, despite your excellent company and graceful comments, unfortunately we have work to do and must depart," I said, using every bit of the acting classes I had had in my life. Oohs and no were heard by almost every woman around us, but we were saved by the DJ announcing one of the performers coming on stage as a fireman. Almost all the women went back to their tables except for the 3 around Mark and a couple next to me. They all insisted on getting a private dance, especially from Mark, but I managed to pry us out with the promise we would come back later to dance. On our way back, Mark was still a bit red and asked him if he was okay. His answer, "I don't know how to dance." Poor Mark, thrown into the deep end of chaos on what was probably supposed to be a simple delivery gig. It's already awkward enough walking into a strip club on the job, but walking into a women's night with male performers? That's a once-in-a-lifetime plot twist. Honestly, it sounds like you both earned some serious laughs. And maybe a little trauma bonding over that one. A night neither of you will forget for sure. And our last story. From notes to evictions, or how we took back our space. When we bought our dream house, it seemed like everything was falling into place. The neighborhood looked quiet, the street was peaceful, and the house next door, a 4-plex, seemed completely unassuming. We thought we'd done all the research we could, multiple walkthroughs, drives at different times of the day, and even casual chats with a couple of neighbors. We felt confident we had picked the right place. That confidence started crumbling the night before closing. We drove by one last time, and lo and behold, both ends of our driveway were partially blocked by cars. Not just a little over the line, no, these cars were parked so far into our small driveway that it was impossible to ignore. We realized the culprits were tenants from the 4-plex. It was a foreboding sign of what was to come. At first, we tried to keep things polite. We left notes on the cars, kindly asking them not to block our driveway. Nothing changed. When we confronted them in person, one of the drivers casually said, "We'll move it later." Spoiler alert, they didn't. Instead, we woke up the next morning to find their cars still in the same spot. Things escalated, more notes went ignored, and some even ended up crumpled in our driveway or taped back onto our car. We decided to put up signs along the driveway that clearly stated, "Private property, no parking or you will be towed." But the tenants didn't care. They wrote snarky messages on the signs with Sharpies and in some cases tore them down completely. When I confronted one tenant about ripping down the signs, they smirked and said, "What are you going to do about it?" Challenge accepted. The next time the cars blocked our driveway, I didn't leave a note, nor did I try to talk it out. I called a tow truck. Watching their cars get hauled away was the first victory in what had become an exhausting battle, but even that didn't stop them. They kept parking there. Only now they seemed to enjoy antagonizing us even more. By this point, we knew we needed to go higher up the chain. The problem was we had no idea who the landlord of the fourplex was. The tenants refused to give us any information, and no one seemed to know who owned the property. After a bit of digging online, I found the property owner's information and called them directly. Initially, I was ignored. It took multiple follow-ups over weeks, but eventually they responded and gave me the contact information for their property manager. With the property manager's contact in hand, I finally felt like I had a way to escalate things. I compiled everything I had, photos of the cars blocking our driveway, videos of the tenants ripping down our signs, and a record of every time we had politely asked them to stop. Over the course of months, I sent email after email, called repeatedly, and kept the property manager updated on every new infraction. Finally, after about a year of back and forth, I got the message I'd been waiting for. Both tenants were being evicted for violating the terms of their lease. When moving day came, I couldn't help but watch through my window as the two tenants begrudgingly loaded their things into their cars. One of them glared at me as if I had ruined their life. Maybe I did, but I didn't care. They'd made our first year in the house an absolute nightmare, and seeing them leave felt like poetic justice. With the two tenants gone, peace was restored to our little corner of the neighborhood. The new tenants who moved into the fourplex have been respectful and have never once blocked our driveway. I'd like to think that the former tenants learned a valuable lesson about respecting other people's property, but if their attitude during the eviction process was any indication, I doubt it. Still, we won, and I feel a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that persistence and a good tow truck company can solve even the most stubborn of problems. It's a wonder they lasted as long as they did before being evicted. Their audacity paired with their refusal to take accountability is what makes their eventual downfall so satisfying. The new tenants sound like a breath of fresh air, and the peace you've earned is well-deserved. It's a reminder that persistence pays off, and that a little paperwork in a tow truck can work wonders. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.